welcome to the Grace to Lead podcast. I'm Belinda Gaston, your host. And listen, today we have an amazing conversation with a very special woman. And so I want to start by introducing her, and then I will welcome her to the show. On our show today, we have Mann Sanders, and she's a spiritual architect, author, Bible teacher, associate minister at First Baptist Church of Glen Arden International in Maryland. She blends Genesis-shaped blueprints with reflective practices and helps people rebuild rhythms after devastating loss, soul-crushing disappointment, and major life disruptions. Her debut book, When Your World Ends, and her forthcoming podcast, Rebuilding Your Life, illuminates God's creative process so people can move from shell-shocked to spirit-sheltered. And she lives what she preaches, y'all. And I am excited about this conversation. Can you do me a favor and welcome Mann Sanders to the show? Welcome, Dawn.
Hello, Belinda. It is a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much. And so, one of the reasons I believe that really this conversation is necessary is because we're at a time where women who lead are having to face difficult situations as they lead. Right? They are leading in places where they've experienced loss, where they've experienced grief, where life situations have happened, and the responsibility to lead is still there. But there are things that are happening with women that are leading that they need to deal with. And I think you are the perfect person for this conversation. So to help our listeners, can you start by just telling us a little bit about your personal story and how you got into this space?
Yeah. So, after what I call a series of unproductive relationships, unfruitful relationships, it wasn't necessarily that the guy was terrible, it just wasn't a good fit. And some of them painful relationships. I finally met and married what several people in my life said was the one. And he blessed me to just have the first year ourselves. Several of our friends, when we got married, after they got married, got pregnant that first year. And even though we didn't meet each other until late in life, we didn't start courting until we were 40 years old. And we both wanted to have a family. He graced me to have that first year where we wouldn't try. We wouldn't do anything because, being late in life too, we didn't want to risk, doing anything to stop it and then not being able to have a family, but we weren't trying. And then God graced us to not be pregnant that first year. But my husband, on our anniversary, I told him we can start on our anniversary trying. And so over that next year, I experienced what I believe to be 3 miscarriages. I say 2, and I document 2 in the book because I was actually able to test and have the proof that I was pregnant twice. But I believe I was pregnant the first time, and before I could test, lost that child. And over the course of the next year, like I said, had 3 miscarriages. And the 3rd miscarriage, I had 6 weeks before my husband's unexpected sudden death. And so I lost what I felt like was my whole family in the course of a year. And with it, I felt like I'd lost my future as well, because as anyone who has experienced loss knows, you don't just lose the person, you lose the hopes and dreams tied to that person. And with the loss of my husband so late in life, I believe I lost the opportunity to have my own family from my body. And so, I was devastated. And that's what led to me writing my book and starting my ministry, helping people rebuild their lives after, like you said, devastating loss, major life disruptions, and soul-crushing disappointments.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think that when people hear stories like yours, it's hard to even imagine how you keep going, right? How do you even get through one miscarriage, let alone two others, and then the loss of your husband? And so we're grateful that you're sharing your story. I'm interested in how you began to move forward. How did you begin to sense God leading you to rebuild? How did you get from that place to where you are?
Thank you, Belinda, for asking that question and phrasing it the way you did about rebuilding. First, I want to say you're right. It is devastating. I don't want to in any way, shape, or form minimize any of my pain or anyone else's pain. What I will say is because I was what I call a late in life mom, because I was pregnant, and I believe life begins at conception. What I will say is I was happy that I got pregnant. I used to celebrate my cycle every month. I know that's rare to hear. After I turned 35, I started celebrating my cycle because it was an opportunity. It was another sign to me that I had an opportunity to have a family. And so I started treating it that way and receiving it that way. So the fact that I got pregnant was just, and that's what I prayed for. And, they say, be careful what you ask for. And the Bible says, ask not, you have not because you ask not. I didn't think at that time that praying for the ability to get pregnant was different than praying to have a baby.
Mm.
And it's different.
Yeah.
And so after my first miscarriage, though I was very thankful to have gotten pregnant, my prayers changed. And I started praying to have a healthy baby. Well, you know the story. I didn't have a healthy baby. After the second miscarriage, that one rocked me. The first one, I was like, oh, I can get pregnant. And I also felt like, though it hurt, like I said, I don't want to minimize my pain, that miscarriage was not, unknown. And I didn't think I was special. Why would I not, why would God shield me from one miscarriage? Now, I did question why he didn't shield me from 2 and 3. I'll be honest about that. Right. What is going on? I thought this was the kind of household, the kind of family that you would want, because we were going to raise up kingdom kids.
Right.
So my husband was a youth minister. Right. And we were both like, what is going on? And I started questioning my body and was very devastated with those other two. And the third one on my husband's birthday.
Wow.
I had what I call a violent miscarriage because the other ones, and I'm just going to use the word violent. We don't need to go any more graphic than that.
Sure.
But here it was so violent. He took me to the emergency room. We thought I was dying because of this miscarriage. I want to mention, because you said, how do you get past it? And I share in the book about how after my husband died, because as long as he was alive, I still had hope for a family. When he died, I very much wanted to go with him. I felt like God made two decisions that day. He didn't just decide to take my husband, he decided to leave me. And even though people were saying God has more for you, I was like, yeah, I'm not signing up for that. I didn't sign up for this. I'm good. I started learning about heaven because I wanted to know what my husband's life was like. And the more I learned about heaven, the more I was like, why do I want to stay here? So I kept praying. I was praying that God would take me too, and he didn't. So when you say what led to me rebuilding, I want to set the stage for what I was rebuilding from. And so I was praying every day, God, I would go to bed every night asking God to take me. And every morning I was waking up and I was like, okay. After a while, I'm like, okay, I'm an intelligent human being. I'm sensing that your answer is no, at least for this season, right? Because we will all surely die, but not necessarily today. Right. And so I started to pick up that, okay, I'm going to be here. And then I started thinking to myself, well, I cannot I cannot continue to hurt because this is just too much. When you think you're going to go that night, you can endure that day's pain. But to endure that day's pain, the same level of pain every single day, I was like, okay, again, I didn't sign up for this. I do, if since you are waking me up and I'm sensing you saying, because I had said this part of my life was I was living through the end of the world as I knew it. Well, and that's what I sensed that God went, yeah, and I want you to live through the end of the world as you know it, right? And so that's what led to me recognizing that God was saying, I kept you because I want you to live. I don't want you to just exist. I don't want you to just survive. I want you to live. You have walked in the land of the dead long enough. Turn and start living again. And so I was like, okay, I need to start living again. And there are a lot of great books out there. I can recommend a few on grieving. Right. I did not find books on rebuilding. And I found that they're different. When you're grieving, you're in one spot. And what I realized is if there's any direction you're going in, it's inward, it's going deeper. That's a different direction than forward. And when you're moving in a different direction, you need different skills and tactics. I also came to understand that the structures, the resources, the insights, even my relationship with God, since this is a Christian podcast, would be different in my new season than it was in my current season. And so I had to develop these new things. And I'm going to tell you something, since this is a podcast for leaders, and I'm so excited about the fact that it's a podcast for leaders, right? As leaders, we get to certain levels and we think certain things are behind us. In fact, the American culture kind of sells us a bill of goods when we're on the path to the American dream. Get your education, check. Buy a house, check. Find your spouse, check. Build your career, check. And not necessarily in this order, but you have a bill of goods and you start checking things off. Build wealth, check. Get your first six-figure job, check, right? You just start, build it, get these titles, check. Travel, check, right? You just start checking these things off. And you think to yourself, oh, well, I've had the six-figure income. I'm never going to have to go back to the five-figure income, right? Because we're moving forward. We don't think we're going to get these setbacks that are going to set us so far back. And now I'm going to take it to the spiritual, right? The way I understood it as a minister was I never expected for it to get this dark after standing in the light. That just didn't compute. My brain was like, what? How can it be this dark? And it's this dark because the tools and the strategies and the processes and the systems that I had spent 25 years building. I had spent 25 years as a software tester. I was at the pinnacle of software testing. When I would interview people, I'd be like, I don't need to practice. I've been doing this thing for 25 years. Right? Now all of a sudden, it's different. And not only was it different spiritually, because I was at the pinnacle of being a software tester, I was hitting a ceiling in my salary. Remember, we're sitting here going, oh, we're going to move forward. And I was like, wait a minute, what is this 1% pay raise? What kind of fresh crazy is this, right? So I pivoted to become a data scientist, right? Using all the skills that I had as a software tester. So I was rebuilding in every area of my life, the reason I mention this. And in every area of my life, I needed new things. And one of the things I realized that I needed that I didn't expect, I had gotten new jobs before. I hadn't changed careers. I mean, 25 years, I hadn't changed careers, but I had gotten new jobs before. I always used the same network. When you pivot, and not only did I pivot to data scientists, right? I'm an author. That's a huge pivot. Data science isn't a huge pivot. I'm using all the skills that I have as a tester, the same degree, everything. That's why I chose it. I didn't have to go back to school or anything to be a data scientist. I didn't have to go back to school in the sense of university to become an author, but I knew nothing about writing a book. And the people I knew hadn't written books. They wrote code, but they didn't write books. So I needed a whole new network of people. So when I say everything was changing, everything changed. But that, to answer your question, that is what led me and how I was able to rebuild. I recognized that I was in a different season, that I was not going to be able to stay in that previous season because I was not going to be able to endure that pain. And in order to go into this new season and be successful, because, we're leaders, we crave and expect at this point success, right? In order for me to succeed, I'm going to need some new skills, soft skills, if not hard skills, or vice versa. I needed a little of both.
Wow. Dawn, there are a couple of things that you said that I don't want us to skip past. And the first is that you recognize that the season that you were in was shifting, that God wanted you to shift because you talked about waking up. It's like, oh, I'm still here. It's okay. I have to live. And so recognizing that season shift and recognizing that you need strategy for those seasons, I think is sometimes where people get stuck. People get stuck in old seasons, and that's either good or bad. One of the things I heard you say was you talked about in your leadership how you had hit a ceiling at the same time, and that's a choice. And so listeners, I want to encourage you to really think about the season you are in. Are you in a season where you're supposed to be in, meaning the season that God wants you in to operate in your leadership, or are you in a season that you're supposed to move from? So that's a question for you to think about as you're listening to Dawn talk. So the other thing, Dawn, that you talked about is how moving into these new seasons required new things. It required new networks for you. It required new skills, new things. And so I want to talk about this, and you've outlined some things in your book, but I want to talk about this one specifically. And you've navigated that. I'd like for you to share one or two things that helped you to begin to move.
Actually, we're talking about some of the stuff in my book, so this is works real well. I talk about in my book is a deep dive into the creation story in Genesis 1. And as I was studying Genesis 1, just for myself personally, wasn't expecting it to become a book, was just, I'm an associate minister, so I study the Bible from time to time. And so I was studying, God took me back to the beginning, right? And he said, study Genesis. And I didn't even think about it being the beginning at that moment. I just was studying Genesis. And so the very first two verses in the New King James read, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was without form, void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Well, Belinda, I didn't get past verse 2 before I was struck by that description. Because I dug deeper. Formless means more than just shapeless. It means unproductive. And when we're stuck, and that's the problem that leaders are having, it's like, wait a minute, being unproductive is foreign to us. We lead other people in their productivity. How is it that we are struggling? It is such a struggle because it's counterintuitive, it's counter to our nature. We're the proverbial fish out of water. Proverbial. going, what the season just, that's what throws us, is because the strengths that we've been given, the gifts that we've been given, the talents, the skills, the experiences, everything that makes us us is rebelling. Because we're like, wait a minute, this how, because many of us are natural born leaders. We've been leading from the cradle. Right? In fact, our parents said things like, oh, they're 13 going on 30, because we have been doing this from jump. And now we're finding ourselves in a place where we can't even lead ourselves, let alone other people. And it feels very uncomfortable. We feel very much not ourselves. And if we can't be ourselves, because everything comes from who we are. I struggled with what I was even calling myself after my husband died. Because, people immediately start calling you a widow. People were like, oh, as a minister, they were like, oh, you can minister to widows. And I was like, yeah, no, I'm not feeling that. Widow, who is that person? That word was foreign to me. I was Reggie's wife, and I'd only been married to him 2 years. I had just gotten comfortable with being his wife. And now people were calling me his widow and telling me I can minister to strangers. I'm like, and about something I don't even know. And I started thinking about this, right? When we're growing up, there's a progression, right? Where we gain certain knowledge as we go on. We decide, again, part of the bill of goods in America that most leaders, at least in America, kind of go through. We pick up certain skills in high school. We go on to college, right? Or trade school, or whatever it is, we get training. And we grow in our identity because of this training. We don't necessarily call ourselves even leaders at first, but because we're natural born leaders, we're out here leading, and we develop confidence in this act of leading because we're just doing it. And as we get this confidence, then we say, oh, when someone says, oh, you're a leader, we stop and we go, oh, they're right. And then we embrace calling ourselves a leader. So it begins with our identity and who we are. And if you're a leader, you do what leaders do. In fact, you start and going, oh, I'm a leader. So then you start you were jumping out there before, but you might have learned through life going, oh, I might need to be careful about but then because you have this confidence, you're like, oh no, I'm a leader. So I'm okay jumping out there. Another way of looking at it is a student. You're taught by your parents or whoever's raising you that students go to school. You're taught by your teachers that students listen, and students read, and students study, and students take tests. And so you learn to do these things. You develop confidence in doing these things. And those are the things you do. When you learn to be, I told you I was a software test engineer. When I learned what it was, I was first a developer, right? I learned how to write code in college. And I started to call myself a programmer because I got confidence in doing that. And I knew it, and they taught me in school what programmers do. And so I did that. But now I'm a widow. Who teaches you to be a widow? I even learned in church how to be a wife. They teach you how to be a wife. They have, in women's ministry, they teach women how to be a wife. In men's ministry, they teach men how to be a husband. They teach parents how to be parents.
Yeah.
You get this training. Who teaches you how to be a widow?
Yeah.
Who teaches you to be a motherless mother, a childless mother? In fact, there's not even a word in the English language for such an entity.
Right.
We have orphans who don't have parents. We have widows who don't have husbands, right? What is the word for a parent who has no children? It's unnatural. That's why we don't have a word. And because it's unnatural, we don't teach people how to do it. So we're thrown into these situations that we have not been prepared for, is basically my point. Going, wait a minute, what am I supposed to do? Well, the first thing you need to do is figure out who you are. And I know that's a big question. because I wrestled with it for years after my husband died. Who am I? But again, I'm loving the fact not only is this a podcast for leaders, but it's a podcast for Christian leaders. There was a part of my identity that though I lost my husband, that I did not lose. I was still Cliff and Eloise's child. Even though I was Reggie's wife and I'm no longer Reggie's wife, I can lose that.
Mm-hmm.
Even though my father passed away before Reggie did, I'm still Cliff's child. Right? I'm still Eloise's child. So as Christians, we're still God's child. We're still Jesus's brother. We are still the Holy Spirit's student. So there are aspects of our identity that are still intact. And that is the joy that I had in having a clean slate, is that I wasn't starting over from scratch, though it felt like it, that there were parts of me that were still there. And I needed to lean into the parts that were still there. I needed to hold on to them. And that's why the first step in my book is remain connected and remain connected to God, is because God had not gone anywhere. I had gone somewhere emotionally and mentally because I had lost who I was. But God had never stopped calling me his child. I am still a child of God, no matter what else happens to me. No matter who else comes and goes from my life, no matter where else I find myself, I am never outside of his reach. And so it begins with who we are, and we are his.
I believe that there's someone listening right now who's like, I hear you, Dawn. I hear you. I'm a believer, but this is hard. This is really hard. And why would God even allow something like this to happen at this time in my life when everything seemed to be so lined up? Where I'm praying, I'm serving, I'm doing all the things, I'm leading well. Why now? What would you say to that woman?
Number one, I'd honor your pain because suffering is real and suffering is painful. Okay. So I'm not in any way, shape, or form going to try to move you from the thought that this hurts or it's painful. I'm going to take you to Deuteronomy. The Lord said, this assignment that I have given you is not too hard, nor beyond your reach. God has empowered you to make it through. And as they say, if you're going through hell, don't stop. Right? Do not make hell your home. Keep on moving so you can get through. And I'm not telling you to rush your grief when I say keep on moving, because grief is part of the process and you need to grieve. And as leaders, we like to bypass the grieving because, like I said, your direction is inward, your direction is deep. And we want to move forward. We're naturally wound to move forward because you can't lead anyone anywhere if you're not moving and going anywhere. But you need to go inward so that you can figure out where you're going. You need to know where you are. You cannot chart. And I know I don't need to explain this. I can just say this because leaders understand this. You cannot get from point A to point B if you do not know where point A is. We wake up one morning and we're like, where am I and how did I get here? Well, then you don't know where you are. You need to figure out point A. Yeah, we all know where point B is. It's better. That's point B, better than where we are. But we cannot get to point B until we deal with point A. And as much as we want to bypass it, go around it, go over it, all of the things, We must go through it. It's like the common cold. You remember how we used to go to the doctor? We don't go now because we know. Again, as leaders, we know. We go, don't have a fever, right? Don't have, it's not flu, it's not COVID, it's not something they can do something about. We need to drink fluids and get plenty of rest. We need to take care of ourselves. That is the activity when you're sick and when you're healing. You are sick. I know we don't want to hear that as leaders, but you're experiencing pain. And what is pain but a sign of sickness, a sign of injury, and a sign that you need to do and you know what to do to heal. You know you need to rest. Drink plenty of fluids. And I keep saying that because fluid in the Bible is a metaphor for God. Water in all its forms, metaphor for God. So you need to rest. Something we as leaders struggle with, again, against our nature. But we also, those of us who have really excelled, have learned that we work best when we rest. And this is an extended season of rest. So clear your schedule. And do you, boo?
That's great advice. I think that as leaders, oftentimes we don't have these conversations. And I'm grateful that we're talking about this now.
We want to have the conversation about how to move forward. And we are having the conversation about moving forward because, again, you can't path the point between A and B until we know A. But we want to just focus on B. But that's why we don't have the conversation, Belinda.
Yeah. And I think those uncomfortable conversations are necessary. So Dawn, you've shared with us your journey. You talked about, you've given some really good insight to people leaders who might be in the situation that you just came in. And I think that there's a lot of confusion and some misperceptions about the whole process of healing, right? And so, can you tell us one of the biggest misconceptions that women who lead have about healing or starting over?
Well, I think the first one that we, like I said, as women, as leaders, the first misconception we have is that if we do everything right, if we check all the boxes, that we're going to keep going forward. But God is clear. Behold, I do a new thing. I recently heard a young pastor, and I think his name is Pointer, in Arkansas, and he preached about how God doesn't go backward. And I really thought about this, right? Because often in the Bible it says remember, but it always says remember with the goal of moving forward, not to move into the past, always to move forward. So, yeah, we're not going to stay where we are forever. We reach this pinnacle and we think, we have this idea that we've arrived. That's one of the misconceptions is that one day you will arrive. And if you arrive somewhere, you're not going back. And what I mean by going back, have setbacks because I've done the things. Well, because let's just, again, we're in Genesis, right? Now, my book deep dives into Genesis 1, but let's visit Genesis 2 for a moment. My husband and I, when we were courting, we studied Genesis 2 because we wanted to study the first couple. Well, again, we didn't get far. We get to chapter 3 of, of the story.
Yeah.
And along comes the serpent who basically just turns everything upside down. And so Adam and Eve were in the Garden of Eden, which is paradise, and a garden that God planted. He didn't just let stuff grow wild like in the wilderness, right? God hand chose everything that was placed in the garden. It was the perfect environment for the pinnacle of his creation, man and woman, Adam and Eve. And so they're in paradise. And along comes this serpent that convinces Eve that it can get better than this. Now, that ain't that a misconception?
Yes.
Right there, you're asking misconceptions, right? It can get better than this, than what you're experiencing, which is a problem because we don't savor where we are because we're always trying to get the next thing, right? And that's what grieving is about, because once it's gone, then we hurt over it. It's like we had this thing that we didn't necessarily appreciate the way we should have when we had it, but now that it's gone, we're hurting over it.
Right.
But back to Adam and Eve, they had been doing, up until this point, they've been doing everything right, right? Because they were in paradise. And now they mess up. So my whole point with this is you can be doing everything quote unquote right, right? And have trials and tribulations come into your life. They don't come into your life because you messed up.
Mm.
In fact, in the book, I talk about how in the Bible, it talks about, I want to say in Isaiah, maybe in Revelation, I can't remember exactly where right now, but in the Bible, God talks about creating a new heaven and a new earth. Again, change. God's going to give us this goodness, right? And in this new place, we're not going to remember our sins. And so I talk about how you might feel like you caused your troubles, like Adam and Eve ultimately did, right? At first, though, they hadn't done anything wrong until they did. But Job did nothing. It says Job was blameless and upright. So whether you feel like you made a mistake or not, challenges and trouble will come your way. So that's a misconception that I can do it all right. And I can do that to protect myself.
Mm-hmm.
As Christians, it's wrong thinking to protect ourselves. The person who protects us is God.
Thank you, Dawn. I'm going to ask one last question of you. I really want to leave listeners with some tangible steps. And one of them you've already identified. I really love the idea of us understanding what point A is. Where are you right now? And being honest with yourself about that. Because a lot of times as leaders, we are used to putting up the facade to lead well, right? We carry things, right? And so what happens is if you have things happening internally, then you hide it and you're good. You can come up with the phrases. I think they call it the spin, right? And so that's, I think, an amazing tip. But are there simple steps that you would share?
Okay. So Belinda, a moment ago, you said that we, as Christian leaders, Christian women, we put up this facade, right? Like we have it all together. And I get it, because you need the people to believe in you, right? They're not going to follow you if they don't believe in you. But what I learned on my journey is that people will actually believe in you more when you're authentic. When God first dropped it in my spirit to share my journey, I was like, yeah, no, I'm not the one, God. I was very much Moses, right? And I'm not the one. And the reason I wasn't the one, I told God this. I said, God, because I'm going to tell the truth. I'm going to tell the truth about how it hurts. I'm not going to sugarcoat that, because I don't think it's going to help people to think that it doesn't hurt. Then they're hurting and they're wondering what's wrong with me, rather than healing, right? Because that's not going to help them heal. I was also concerned. I was scared because I was like, people are going to see the real me, right? Before they sinned, Adam and Eve were naked and unafraid. I was fearful to show people my pain. I hurt so much, Belinda, and I'm not afraid now, so I'm going to say it. I hurt so much, I thought I lost my faith. That's how the devil attacked me. And I was like, how can I minister, bring people to Christ? How can I'm a leader, right? That's what minister, I lead people. That's the phrase they even use, lead people to Christ. How can I lead people to Christ? And I'm questioning if I'm there anymore. Right? So how can I lead people? And people need to hear that leaders struggle, but they work through it. That struggle isn't the end. It's part of the journey we're leading people on. Because there are going to be struggles on every journey. And if we don't show people when we're moving ahead and the bumps happen and all they see you is, hey, oh, we just moving through. And they're like, wait a minute, this a bumpy ride. This a bumpy ride. I'm on bumps, but you just, hey, ho, and you don't experience any bumps, or you go, oh, that bump was nothing. Let's just stay focused. And they're like, my focus is everywhere but on this thing. That's not honest and it's not helpful. And I'm going to say one other thing, specifically, again, because of our culture. And I don't think this is just true of America. When I say our culture, I mean as people. I think the world, but definitely America, is going through this post-truth era where we're celebrating people for being dishonest. We're following people who are regularly dishonest, and you know they're dishonest. You know what they're telling you isn't true because you're sitting up here going, I know white is white and black is black and this rain is wet. I know rain is wet, and you're trying to tell me rain is dry, right? And we sit up here and we go, because it sounds good, because it's the America we want. We're listening and we're following, and because we don't like what other people are saying, we don't like the truth of what's being said. But how can we be Christian leaders? How can we be Christian post-truth leaders? That doesn't even follow. You can't be Christian and post-truth. And where does all of our faith begin? Again, if I can't lead people to Jesus, if I'm struggling with my own relationship with Jesus. So we have to be honest first with ourselves, and then be honest with other people so that people understand that this isn't easy. But like I said, it's not too hard. And I'm going to go back to Genesis and wrap this up. When in the Genesis story, God blessed us to be fruitful, multiply, and have dominion. When Adam and Eve were cursed, they did not lose their fruitfulness. It just became hard. Before the sin, it was easy. Well, we live in a sinful world, y'all, and so it's hard. Do you know what softens hard ground? Moisture. What makes ground hard is a lack of moisture. Good ground, ground that's fruitful, is moist ground. Ground that, and I just been teaching on this on my Instagram and social media. I have, over this past month, I started with good ground, that we have the ability to become good ground. What happens in life hardens us. It evaporates that moisture, but we can become good ground again. It's not a one-time thing. Again, we don't check all the boxes, get there, and it's over. So when we get hardened, we can become good ground again. The way we become good ground again begins with moisture. I found out this week that seeds can grow with water, but not without water. That the first thing that activates a seed is water. And think about when we used to put potatoes in jars. We didn't have to put them in the ground. We put them in water. Water is a nutrient, and nutrients are things we cannot produce ourselves. That, by definition, a nutrient is something an organism needs but cannot produce themselves. Our bodies are wonderful things, and they're 60% water, but that water does not come from our bodies. It came somewhere else, and we have to constantly put water in. We can survive only a limited time, 3 days, I think it is, a little over 3 days without water. So the way hard ground becomes soft is it gets wet. Now, you can get wet in rain, and some rain comes in storms. The storm doesn't harden you. You become hardened. Be clear about that, because the storm brings rain, right? Storms bring rain. The storm didn't harden you. You became hard. You did that.
Wow.
You chose to do that, like you were saying, choices. So there's rain. Sometimes there's mists or drizzle. So I've been saying drops, drizzle, and dew, right? So you can sometimes have these storms. You can sometimes have drizzle. What's wonderful about drizzle is you go out there in the drizzle and you're like, oh, this ain't nothing. And 10 minutes later, you're drenched. And then there's dew. Even when it's sunny outside, God gives us dew every morning. But you know what? The real watering comes with Psalm 1:3 when we're planted by streams. That one is happy. That one is fruitful. When we allow ourselves, and that's step 3 in my book, when we create a steady flow in our lives.
I think that's a great place for us to end. Dawn, thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast. Listen, this conversation has been so rich. I know that there are people who want to know how to reach you. So I'd love for you to share how people can reach you, and if there's anything you're working on that you'd like to share with our listeners, now would be a great time to do it.
So they can share. They can find me at dawnmannsanders.com. That's Dawn, D-A-W-N, Mann, M-A-N-N, Sanders, S-A-N-D-E-R-S.com. Dawn Mann Sanders is also my handle on social media. So Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Dawn Mann Sanders is my handle on all these things. And the thing I'm currently working on is actually 2 things. My audiobook is coming out in September 16th. And you guys can get connected with me. I just launched this new initiative called the Creative Restoration Movement. It launched on Juneteenth, and I chose Juneteenth because I'm all about restoration and rebuilding. And Juneteenth is about delayed restoration. And so that's why I launched it there. I'm going to give you the link because the landing page has not connected to my website yet. So I'm going to give you the link. People can sign up and become a part of this because I have resources for people to be restored. God has given us the ability to be restored. And so I'll have lots of resources there, like devotionals, meditations, other ebooks, just things, and a whole community, Facebook group, all of that. All the things, Belinda, I have all the things.
Excellent. Excellent. And so for our listeners, we'll have all of the links to the website as well as the Creative Restoration Movement in the show's notes. Do you want to talk about your podcast that's coming up?
I would love to talk about my podcast. Thank you very much. My podcast is called Rebuilding Your Life with Dawn Mann Sanders. And we're basically going to walk through God's creative process with people from all different walks of life. I have a series that I'm beginning with called The Many Roads to Rebuilding. So I'll have different people on who have experienced different things. And I mention that because a lot of people feel like, well, I haven't had a miscarriage. I haven't lost my husband. Does this apply to me? And it applies to you if you have experienced, yes, a devastating loss, but also a major life disruption or a soul-crushing disappointment. And so I'm bringing people on who can help people see that their lives can be enriched by embracing God's creative process and joining the greater creative restoration movement.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dawn. This has been a plum-pleasing pleasure talking to you. Thank you for your time today, Dawn. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Belinda. I tell you, it was a joyful moment, so I know the Spirit showed up.
Yes, I think this has been amazing. And for our listeners, thank you so much for being a Grace to Lead listener. I don't take your time listening or connecting with the show for granted. Also, remember, you can always send me a text message. In the show's notes, there's a place where you can send me a message. I read all of your messages. And for those who have sent messages, I will respond. So thank you for continuing to be a Grace to Lead listener. And remember, we will be back again on Thursdays. Thank you for listening. And until we meet each other again, remember, you are indeed Grace to Lead. Bye-bye.